They mocked Jackson for adopting two homeless black siblings, Samson and Emma. But years later, the same people were on their knees begging for their help. What led the town to such desperation that made them swallow their pride? Before we get into the story, kindly comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. When Jackson Smith stood in front of the courthouse, his heart was racing from joy and fear. He found two beautiful black babies, Emma and Samson, on the street and was about to become a dad. He was 42 years old. As the judge signed off on the adoption, Jackson felt loved and cared for all over again. The judge smiled and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Smith. You are now officially the father of these two children." When Jackson looked down at the sleeping babies in their slings, his eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, in a loud, emotional voice. Jackson couldn't help but smile as he walked out of the building. He carefully put the cases in his car and drove home, full of thoughts about the life he would build with his new family. But soon enough, the harsh truth of small-town prejudice took away from the happiness of that moment. Jackson saw the looks and whispers as he walked down Main Street pushing the double stroller with Emma and Samson inside. The town gossip, Mrs. Johnson, didn't even try to hide the fact that she didn't like it. She said quietly, "Well, I never," as Jackson walked by. What was he thinking, taking in those children? Even though Jackson's heart hurt, he kept his head up and kept going. But it hurt to see how narrow-minded some people could be. He knew that love was more important than their race. While at the grocery store, Jackson carefully chose diapers and baby food while trying to ignore the strange looks from other buyers. He heard two women talking behind him while he was in line to pay. One of them said, in a stage whisper, "It's just not natural. Those poor babies won't know their real culture." Jackson took a deep breath and told himself that what they thought didn't matter. He cared about Emma and Samson because he loved them. It was hard for Jackson to handle the town's criticism as he put the babies to sleep that night. But when he saw how calm his kids were, he knew he had made the right choice. He was set on giving Emma and Samson the best life possible, no matter what other people thought. There was no color to his love. When people in the small town heard that Jackson had been adopted, it caused a lot of talk and gossip. Jackson could feel the weight of nosy and critical looks following him everywhere he went. The news of his choice shocked everyone, even his closest friends and family. Amy, Jackson's sister, came to visit one sunny afternoon. Amy couldn't keep her worries inside any longer as they sat on the porch and watched Emma and Samson play in the yard. "Jackson," she asked nervously, "you sure you understand this? It won't be easy to raise black kids in our town." When Jackson looked at his sister, his eyes were filled with purpose. "Amy, I know it won't be easy, but love doesn't care what color the walls are. I'm going to give these kids a caring home because they deserve it." Amy sighed and shook her head. "I only worry about you and them. People here are sometimes so closed-minded." Jackson put his hand on his sister's and squeezed it. "That's exactly why I need to do this to show that love can overcome prejudice." Jackson heard whispers from the next booth at the neighborhood diner. A voice from a woman asked, "Did you hear about Jackson Smith? He went and took in two black babies. In this town what could happen?" "Those poor kids," said another voice. "They'll never fit in here." Even though it hurt, Jackson told himself that what they thought didn't matter. He cared about Emma and Samson because he loved them. Jackson had doubts and questions even at church, which should have been a safe place for him to be. Pastor Mike took him aside after the service on Sunday. The minister said, with a worried look on his face, "Jackson, I admire your kindness. But have you thought about the problems these kids will have as they grow up here? Finding them a home in a neighborhood with more different kinds of people might be nicer." When he answered, Jackson stood tall and kept his voice steady. "Father, I think that love can make people change their minds and hearts. Samson and Emma are now my children, and this is their home. No matter what problems come up, our family will work through them together." It seemed like everyone had an opinion or piece of advice all the time. But Jackson stayed committed. He always said, "I'll always love you, no matter what anyone else says or thinks," as he tucked Emma and Samson into bed at night. "We'll always be a family, no matter what." Coming into their new home with Emma and Samson made Jackson's heart swell with happiness. There was new life in the house, which had been quiet and empty before. Jackson had spent weeks getting ready for this moment by turning the spare rooms into soft-colored nurseries stuffed with toys. "Welcome home, little ones," Jackson said in a whisper, his voice full of feeling. As he put each child in their crib, he marveled at their tiny fingers and calm faces. Though the days went by, Jackson got used to being a dad. He learned how to give kids bottles, change diapers, and calm them down when they cried in the middle of the night. He was so tired, but he felt a deep satisfaction he had never felt before. Jackson chose a sunny morning to take his family on their first trip to the shopping store. Carefully putting Emma and Samson in their double stroller made his heart beat faster with joy. As soon as they walked into the store, Jackson realized that the mood had changed. There was a tense silence after the normal friendly chatter stopped. As he pushed the baby down the aisles, he could feel eyes on them. Not quite gently enough, a woman asked her friend, "Did you see that? Those babies can't be his." Even though his lips hurt, Jackson kept his head up and thought about his shopping list and the needs of his kids. In the produce area, an old man shook his head in disapproval. He said, "What's this town coming to?" out loud enough for Jackson to hear. As Jackson picked out some apples, his hands shook a little. He took a deep breath and reminded himself of how much he loved Emma and Samson. The cashier's eyes got really big when she saw this. She looked back and forth between Jackson and the babies, making her discomfort clear. When she asked, Jackson told her, "These are my children," in a strong but kind voice. The cashier gave an awkward nod and started to look through the things. Jackson was worried about the future. On the way home, how would he keep Emma and Samson safe from the unfair treatment they would receive? He felt a strong will as he looked at their innocent faces in the rearview mirror. "We may have some hard times," he told his sleeping kids in a soft voice. "But I promise to teach you how to be strong and loving, no matter what. We always have each other's backs in this." Jackson was amazed to see Emma and Samson grow from tiny babies to interested toddlers over the course of the months. Their first words, steps, and giggles made everyone in the house happy and laugh out loud. He yelled, "Look at you go," as Emma took her first shaky steps across the living room. Samson didn't want to be left behind, so he climbed up on the coffee table and set out to follow his sister. Jackson loved to read stories, play peekaboo, and sing baby rhymes all day long. He loved these easy times and the love that flowed between him and his kids, no matter what. But the world outside wasn't always so friendly and open. Jackson joined a parenting group in his area so that he could meet other parents and give Emma and Samson a chance to meet new people. As he walked into the community center with his two young children, he felt the familiar chill of being judged. The other parents smiled politely, but there were doubts and questions in their eyes. When Jackson walked up, people would stop talking quickly and only start talking again in quiet tones after he was gone. "Hi there," Jackson said to a mother who was sitting close. "I'm Jackson, and these are Emma and Samson." The woman gave a stiff nod. She said, "Hello," then turned away to fuss over her own child. He took a big breath and looked at Emma and Samson, who were happily playing in the toy corner. Jackson's smile faded. He got down on the floor with them and helped them use bright blocks to build a tower. "That's it, sweetheart," he told Samson as he carefully put a red block on top. "You're doing great." As the tower got higher, Emma clapped her hands with joy. Jackson's heart was full of love, which pushed away the pain of being turned down by the other parents. Even though some people were rude to him, Jackson was still determined to give Emma and Samson the best childhood possible. He put all of his energy into making his home a loving and caring place. When Emma and Samson were old enough to go to school, Jackson was both excited and nervous. He knew that this big step would bring new problems. But he hoped that the kids would make friends and feel welcome among their peers. Jackson walked Emma and Samson to their classroom on the first day of school. He was so proud of them for being brave enough to start something new. He told them, "You two are going to do great," and then he gave each of them a tight hug before they went to join their peers. But as the days went by, Jackson noticed that Emma wasn't as happy as she usually was. She came home one afternoon with tears running down her face and her small shoulders shaking from crying. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Jackson asked, as he got down on his knees and gave her a comforting hug. "Nobody wants to play with me," Emma sobbed through her tears. "Mia's mom said she can't come to my birthday party because we're different." As Jackson held his daughter close, his heart broke. Samson saw that his sister was upset and put his little hand on her back. "I told them, come here, both of you," and Jackson led them to the couch under the covers. He took a seat and put Emma and Samson on his lap. "I need you to listen carefully, okay?" The kids nodded, and their eyes were wide with faith. Jackson carefully chose his words as he began. "People are afraid of things they don't understand sometimes. And fear makes them do mean things sometimes." He was very kind and wiped Emma's tears away. "But that doesn't mean you're broken. I love you both more than anything else in the world. You are both so unique and wonderful. But why don't they like us?" Samson asked, with a weak and mixed-up voice. He took a deep breath. "Because your skin isn't the same color as theirs, some people might judge you. You shouldn't have to deal with that with them. The color of your skin is lovely, and it makes you special." He gave them a stronger hug. "Remember that we're a family. We always love each other. And lots of good people will love you just the way you are, like I do." Tonight was parent-teacher night at the school, and Jackson took a deep breath as he parked his car in the busy lot. There were hard times ahead, but his love for Emma and Samson kept him going. As he walked into the school, people looked at him with interest and whispered to each other. Jackson told himself that he was there for his kids while keeping his head up. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Thompson, gave Jackson a warm welcome in her classroom. He was told to sit down, and she said, "Mr. Smith, it's great to see you." Mrs. Thompson started by saying, "Emma is such a smart little girl. She's always eager to learn and has a real talent for math." Jackson was so proud of his daughter that it made his heart swell with joy. Jackson couldn't help but notice that other parents in the room were looking at Mrs. Thompson with sideways eyes as she talked about Emma's accomplishments. When Jackson went to Samson's classroom, he felt the same range of feelings. Samson's teacher, Mr. Roberts, said nice things about his son's work and how nice he was. "For his age, Samson has a way with words that's really impressive," Mr. Roberts said. "And he's always the first to help a classmate in need." During the whole night, Jackson had a mixed feeling of happiness and unease. Even though his kids' successes made him happy, the cold looks and whispered comments from other parents stayed with him like a heavy cloud. Jackson went back to his car as the night ended. When he was behind the wheel, he stopped to think. The road ahead would be hard, but hearing great things from Emma and Samson's teachers made him even more confident in their abilities. The more he drove, the stronger his resolve became. Even though people were looking down on them, Jackson knew that Emma and Samson could get through anything with love, support, and direction. As the years went by, Emma and Samson went from being curious babies to smart, interested kids. Their laughing filled Jackson's house and made him happy. Even though things in the town were still moving slowly, Jackson saw that the way they were treated was changing over time. People stopped inviting me to neighborhood events, and not as many neighbors waved hello. Inclusion became more clear over time, but Jackson tried to brush it off at first. Jackson sipped coffee and read the local paper at the kitchen table on a sunny Saturday morning. His attention was drawn to an ad for the town picnic, which they had been going to every year since the kids were babies. This year, they hadn't received an invitation in the mail. There was a lot of bounce in Emma's 10-year-old hair as she ran into the kitchen. "Dad, when is the town picnic? May we go this year?" Jackson felt his heart sink. She was to sit next to him, so he put down his coffee mug and waved. He said in a soft voice, "Sweetheart, I don't think we'll be going this year." Emma's face turned down. "But why? We always go." Samson, who is now 12 years old, joined the talk. He was beginning to understand how their family was treated differently in small ways. He took a deep breath. "Sometimes people have a hard time accepting families that look different from their own," he said. "But that doesn't make our family any less special or important." He reached out and grabbed one of each child's hands. "Our love for each other is the most important thing. That's what makes us strong." With a serious look on his face, Samson nodded. "Is that why some kids at school don't want to play with us?" Even though Jackson's heart hurt, he saw a chance to teach someone a valuable lesson. "Yes, son. Remember though that what they do says more about them than about us. We can't change how people treat us, but we can change how we react." As the years went by, Emma's caring nature grew into a strong interest in medicine. When she was 12, she often took care of hurt animals in their garden. From the kitchen window one warm afternoon, Jackson saw Emma carefully bandage a bird's broken wing. "Dad," Emma yelled with joy, "look at me, I believe I have fixed it." When Jackson went outside, he had a big smile on his face. He knelt down next to his daughter and looked at what she had made. "That's great, honey. You were very good." Emma was very proud of herself. "Do you think I could be a doctor someday, Dad?" Jackson put a soft hand on her shoulder. "Emma, if you really want to, you can be anything. I'm sure you'll be a great doctor if you want to be one." Late that night, Jackson found Emma curled up on the couch, with a big book about the human body under her nose. He couldn't help but be proud of how hard she worked. At the same time, Samson was becoming very concerned with doing what is right. At age 14, he asked Jackson a lot of questions about what was fair and equal. A homeless guy was being pushed away from a storefront one day. As Samson and his family walked home from the store, "Dad, why did that store owner treat that man so badly?" Samson asked, with a worried look on his face. Jackson sighed and thought about what to say. "Sometimes, Samson, people rate others without reading their story. It's not right, but it does happen." Samson had a look of purpose in his eyes. "But it's not right. It needs to be fixed by someone." Jackson nodded, because he could tell his son was feeling very strongly. "Yes, son, and maybe one day, you'll be that person." Samson kept asking Jackson a lot of questions about fairness and justice as they walked home. Jackson carefully answered all of them, encouraging his son to work toward a more fair world. As Jackson put his kids to bed that night, he felt very proud of himself. Emma, whose medical books were all over her room, and Samson, who asked deep questions about justice, were both becoming very interesting young people. Jackson knew that their kindness and drive would get them far, even though they were facing problems. As winter set in for the small town, a nasty flu attack spread through the area. As the illness spread quickly, families were stuck in bed and had a hard time taking care of each other. Even though he had been teased and left alone for years, Jackson couldn't watch his friends suffer. On a cold morning, Jackson wrapped up Emma and Samson, who were now teenagers, and piled into the car with homemade soup, over-the-counter drugs, and other necessary items. The Johnsons were their first stop. This family had been very mean to them over the years. Jackson shook his head and knocked on the door. Mrs. Johnson spoke up, but her face was pale and moody. When she saw Jackson and his kids, she blinked in surprise. Jackson said in a soft voice, "We heard you were all sick. We brought some things to help." Mrs. Johnson paused, and her tired eyes showed that she was confused. After a short time, she moved out of the way to let them in. Jackson and his kids got to work inside. Using what little she knew about medicine, Emma took temps and gave medicine. Samson put together the materials and made sure that everyone had what they needed. Jackson cleaned the house and heated up the soup. Mr. Johnson watched from the couch as they worked. His face showed a mix of thanks and shame. "Why are you doing this?" he asked in a low voice. "After all the years we've been mean to you?" Jackson stopped and carefully thought about what he was saying. He just said, "Because it's the right thing to do. No matter how different we are, we're all part of this community." The town heard about how kind Jackson was. Some people, who needed help badly, put aside their pride and let him help them. It took Jackson, Emma, and Samson days to go from house to house and help people where they were needed. As the flu spread ended, there was a small change in the mood of the town. People who used to cross the street to avoid Jackson now reluctantly nodded to show that they saw him. A few people in the town even started short conversations with him at the grocery shop. As teens, Emma and Samson continued to deal with the subtle biases that still existed in their community. After a tough day at school, the kids sat at the kitchen table. One night, their faces filled with worry and confusion. Emma, who is now 15 years old, looked up while Jackson made dinner. She spoke slowly and asked, "Dad, why do some people in town still treat us differently?" Samson, who was 2 years younger, spoke up. "Yeah, they seem scared of us or something." Jackson stopped stirring the pasta sauce with the wooden spoon and put it down. After taking a big breath, he sat down with his kids at the table. His eyes were full of love and worry. "Kids," he said in a soft voice, "the world isn't always fair or nice. Some people decide who someone is based on how they look, without getting to know them first." That made Emma's brow pucker. "But that's not right. We did not do anything wrong." Jackson agreed and said, "You're right, sweetheart. It's not fair, and you're not to blame. People worry about things they don't know much about, and that worry can turn into bias." Samson leaned forward and looked straight ahead. "Then why don't we hate them back?" Jackson turned his head away. "Sam, that's not the answer. Hatred makes more hatred. We should instead be kind to everyone, even if they don't earn it." "Compassion?" asked Emma. Jackson said, "It means trying to understand how other people feel, even if we don't agree with them. When we understand, we make it possible for things to change." As the kids thought about what their dad said, the kitchen went silent. Samson asked his father, in a voice that was almost whispered, "Doesn't it hurt you when they treat us badly?" Jackson had tears in his eyes. "Of course, it does," she said. "It breaks my heart to see how hard things are for you both. I want you to know, though, that love is stronger than any bias. The most important thing is our love for each other." He reached out and grabbed one of their hands. "Remember this important thing. Forgiving someone doesn't mean you agree with their bad behavior. It means you let go of your anger and bitterness. We are strong, not weak, when we forgive." Emma put her hand on her dad's. "Like how you helped us when the flu was going around, even though people were mean to us." Jackson smiled proudly and nodded. "Exactly. Even when it's hard, we rise above hate by being kind and caring." As they sat there with their hands joined together, they came to a new understanding. The talk changed everything for the Smith family. It brought them closer together and made them more determined to face the problems of the world as a team. Emma and Samson became successful young adults over the years, and Jackson always supported them as they went after their dreams. Now in her early 20s, Emma set her sights on medical school because she wanted to help people get better and make a change in their lives. The younger Samson became a lawyer because he had a strong sense of right and wrong and wanted to fight for equality. The day Emma got her letter of acceptance to medical school was a very happy day in the Smith home. As Jackson gave his daughter a tight hug, his eyes filled with tears of joy. He said in a whisper, "You did it, sweetheart. I knew you could." Samson yelled with joy and gave his sister a bear hug, which made her stand up. He smiled and said, "Dr. Emma Smith. That does sound good, doesn't it?" A few months later, Samson got his own letter of acceptance to law school, which made him happy too. Jackson hugged his kids close, and his happiness made his heart swell. With a heavy heart, he said, "You both have worked so hard. I'm so proud of the people you've grown into." Even though the brothers had done well, the town still had old prejudices. At the nearby diner, you could hear whispered talks. Another older person said, "I don't get how those kids got into such good schools. Must be some kind of quota system." But Emma and Samson didn't let those words stop them. Focusing on their goals gave them strength because Jackson had loved and helped them their whole lives. They knew that their success wasn't just their own, but also a sign of how much their father had helped them and taught them. On the porch of their childhood home, Emma, Samson, and Jackson were getting ready to go to their own schools. The air was heavy with memories and excitement about what was to come. "Dad, we wouldn't be here without you," Emma said in a soft voice. "With your love and help, we've been able to do everything." Emma worked hard at school and did very well in medical school because of it. Her kind heart and smart mind made her stand out from her friends, and she quickly rose to the top of her class. Her teachers liked how hard she worked and how she could connect with patients during simulations. As the date of her first hospital rotation got closer, Emma was both excited and worried. She knew that going back to the hospital in her city might be hard, but she was determined to handle them with class and grace. Emma walked into the hospital on her first day with her head held high and her white coat brand new. Her father had told her, "Always lead with kindness, no matter what." She took a deep breath. Soon, everyone knew that Jackson Smith's adopted daughter was now a medical student at the hospital. As some staff members stared and mumbled, old biases came to the surface. Mrs. Thompson, an old woman she knew from around town, was Emma's first patient. Mrs. Thompson's eyes lit up when she saw Emma walk into the room. "You're Jackson Smith's girl, aren't you?" The tone of Mrs. Thompson's voice was cool and far away. The woman's words hurt Emma, but she smiled kindly and tried to forget about them. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Emma Smith. I'm going to help take care of you today. How do you feel?" The answers Mrs. Thompson gave were short, but Emma stayed calm and kind. She carefully told Mrs. Thompson about the treatment plan, answered her questions, and made sure she was at ease. As the days went by, Emma ran into more people who knew who she was. Some were openly mean, refusing to look her in the eye or talking to her quickly. Others were just not paying attention, and their discomfort showed in the way they moved. That didn't change Emma's mind. It didn't matter how the patient felt about her. She treated everyone with the same amount of care and respect. Her father had taught her a lot about empathy and forgiveness, and she used those skills to guide how she interacted with other people. As soon as Samson walked into Hartman and Associates' shiny offices, he felt both excited and determined. The well-known law company gave him the internship he wanted, and he was ready to make the most of it. He was excited to learn and grow because this chance came his way. Because of his smart mind and strong desire for justice, Samson was thrown into a world of complicated court issues from the very first day. His job was to read through papers, help with research, and watch talks with clients. But it wasn't long before he noticed a worrying pattern. Many of the firm's free cases were about people from disadvantaged groups who had been discriminated against. Samson felt a familiar pain in his heart as he looked into these situations more. He remembered the mean looks and whispered statements he and Emma had to deal with as kids. He thought of Jackson, who had worked hard to give them a loving home, even though everyone in the town thought it was wrong. A young immigrant family was being unfairly kicked out of their home one day, and Samson was asked to help them with the case. When he heard their story, he saw the same fear and helplessness in their eyes that he had seen in himself before. It made him feel something deep inside. "We'll do everything we can to help you," Samson told them, with strong belief. Everyone deserves a fair chance. Samson's desire for justice got stronger as he worked on the case. He stayed late at work to look over past cases and come up with reasons. His hard work caught the attention of the senior partners, who began to notice how skilled and driven the young intern was. Every day that went by, Samson's determination grew stronger. He thought the law could be a strong force for change and a way for people who had been shut up to speak out. He thought of Jackson, who spoke up for him, and Emma when everyone else tried to look the other way. "This is why I'm here," Samson told himself one night as he got ready for a very important meeting. "To fight for those who can't fight for themselves, just like Dad fought for us." As the years went by, Emma's hard work in medical school paid off. She finished first in her class and then went back to her hometown to start her residency at the hospital there. Once upon a time, rumors about her filled the halls. Now, everyone was excited for the young doctor to arrive. The first few months of Emma's life were hard. Some of her coworkers and patients still had questions about her skills, because of their biases that were still there. But Emma didn't lose focus. She treated each patient with the kindness and skill that her father had taught her. It wasn't long before Emma's skills became clear. Other doctors had been stumped for months before she finally figured out what the rare condition was. This gave hope to a family that had almost given up. In the small town, word quickly got around about how good she was. As Emma took on more difficult tasks, she did so with determination and skill. She did study and talk to experts for hours on end, always putting her patients first. She worked hard and was rewarded when she did a dangerous surgery on a child and saved their life. People in the town started to pay attention. People who used to cross the street to stay away from Jackson and his kids now go to see Dr. Emma Smith for medical care. There were both new and old faces in the waiting room, all eager to see the doctor that everyone was talking about. Even though her fame was rising, Emma stayed humble. Her only goal was to make sure her patients were happy and healthy, never to get credit or attention for her work. Some people had doubts about her in the past, but she treated them with the same respect and kindness she showed everyone else. A nurse was talking to another nurse as Emma was leaving the hospital after a long shift. "Can you believe Dr. Smith saved another life today?" a man asked, and to think we all wondered if she'd amount to anything when her father first brought her here. Emma took a moment to really think about what was said. She thought about her dad and how much love and help he had given her and Samson over the years. As she walked, she kept thinking about the people she would see tomorrow, and had a small smile on her face. After growing up with prejudices, Samson had always been interested in doing what was right. Now that he was a lawyer, he had to deal with those biases every day. When the Johnson family from the area came to him with their story of being wrongfully kicked out of their home, Samson knew he had to take the case. The Johnsons had been renting their home for 5 years without any problems. They were a mixed-race couple with 2 young children. When a new landlord took over, though, they were served with an eviction letter, even though they had always paid their rent on time. Samson found a trend of discrimination as he looked into the case more. Families of color were being pushed out by the new owner, who was then renting to white people. A stark warning of the unfair things that were still going on in their small town. The day of the court hearing came, and Samson felt like he had a lot riding on him. He knew that many people in town still saw him as Jackson Smith's adopted son instead of a good lawyer. But Samson's voice was loud and clear when he stood in front of the judge. Samson went on, "Your Honor," his eyes fierce. "This case is about more than just one family's home. It's about the values we say we stand for, and the very fabric of our town." The people in the courtroom were paying close attention to Samson as he made his case. He showed proof of discrimination and talked about how it affected the Johnson family. People who had doubts about him seemed to be paying close attention. The judge, an older man who had lived in the town all his life, leaned forward in his chair and furrowed his face. When Samson was done with his closing remarks, the courtroom went silent. The judge cleared his throat after what seemed like forever. Because of the proof that was given, he said, "I rule in favor of the Johnson family. The order to vacate is hereby thrown out, and they are to be allowed to stay in their home." Hearing a joint gasp in the courtroom was followed by the sobs of relief from the Johnson family. Samson shook Mr. Johnson's hand and smiled at them as he did so. Samson could feel that everyone in town was looking at him as they left the building. Some people respected him more than before, while others were still not sure what to think. One thing that did matter to Samson, though, was that justice was done. As Emma and Samson kept making waves in their own fields, the small town that had laughed at them before started to pay attention. There were rumors going around about how successful the Smith brothers were. Mrs. Thompson had always been one of the loudest critics of Jackson's choice to adopt. She was having coffee with her friends at a nearby diner. Her voice was a mix of shock and disbelief as she asked, "Did you hear about Dr. Emma Smith's latest surgery? They're saying she saved a man's life when no one else could." Sarah, her friend, said yes. "What about Samson? I think he just won a big case in the city. Those kids look nothing like the ones we used to see at the playground." As they thought about how they had treated the Smith family over the years, the cold looks, the whispered comments, and the purposeful leaving them out conversation at their table became quiet. Now that Emma and Samson have done well, it all seems so small. Talks like these were happening across town at the hardware shop. The store's owner, Mr. Jenkins, had to explain the Smiths to some of his older customers. "You know, those kids have really made something of themselves," he noted. "Maybe we were too quick to judge." Some people in the town were still confused by what happened. How could the kids they made fun of and shunned become so successful adults? It made them question long-held views and biases. And it made it hard for them to make sense of what happened in the past and what is happening now. Some people, on the other hand, started to feel the first signs of sorrow. They thought about all the times they had ignored Jackson and his kids. Like at party invitations they hadn't sent, or at community events, where they made them feel like they weren't welcome. As word of Emma and Samson's recent accomplishments spread, more and more people thought about how they had behaved in the past. The Smith brothers' success was a strong reminder that love, hard work, and good parenting could get past even the strongest prejudices. When Emma was done with her rounds at the hospital, her pager went off. When she looked at the screen, she saw an important message: "Mr. Wilkins, room 302, critical condition." When she saw the name, her heart skipped a beat. Mr. Wilkins was one of the town's loudest critics of her family, and he often led the charge to keep them out of community events. Emma took a big breath, got ready, and went to room 302. When she walked in, she saw Mr. Wilkins lying in the hospital bed. He looked pale and weak. When she got close, his eyes got big with recognition. He said, "Dr. Smith," in a voice that was barely above a whisper. I didn't expect to see you here." Emma smiled softly. Her professional attitude hid any trouble she was feeling inside. "Mr. Wilkins, I'm here to help. How do you feel?" Mr. Wilkins coughed hard, making his body shake. "That's not good, Doc. I believe I'm going to die." Emma looked over his report and checked his vital signs. Even though things were bad, she knew there was still hope. As she talked about the possible treatments, Mr. Wilkins grabbed her hand out of the blue. He begged, "Please," and tears came to his eyes. "Please help me. Since I hurt you and your family, I know I don't deserve it, but please. I'm scared." Emma had a lump in her throat, but she squished his hand to calm herself down. "Mr. Wilkins, it's my job to help everyone, no matter what their life is like. I promise I'll do everything I can to help you get better." As Emma started to help Mr. Wilkins, she saw that he was acting differently. As time went on, The fear in his eyes changed into a mix of thanks and shame. He would watch her work with a serious face while she was getting treatments. "You know," he said one day, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I never thought I'd say this, but I was wrong about you, Dr. Smith, and about your whole family." Samson had always been dedicated to doing what was right. But he had no idea how important his most recent case would become. It all began when he took on a difficult discrimination case involving unfair evictions in a nearby town. Samson was set on fighting for what was right. Even though the case was tough and strong, people were against the victims. Legal experts from all over the country were amazed by Samson's sharp mind and passionate points as the trial went on. His creative approach to the case made national news in newspapers and legal magazines, because it set a new standard in discrimination law. People quickly heard about Samson's success, and soon, people from the town that had rejected him before were at his door. One afternoon, the mayor came up to Samson and looked embarrassed and helpless. "Mr. Smith," the mayor said, "we need your help." The tone of his voice was both respectful and silly. "We think you're the only person who can win this case for our town, which is being sued for the same thing." Samson was shocked. He remembered too well the mean looks and whispered words people had said to him as a child in this town. But when he saw how beseeching the mayor looked, he remembered what his dad had said: "Love and forgiveness can change hearts." Taking a deep breath, Samson said, "Yes, I'll take the case," he said, with confidence. As Samson worked hard to protect the town, something amazing started to happen. People who used to cross the street to avoid him now stop and shake his hand. Former classmates who had turned him down at parties are now inviting him to neighborhood events. As Samson was leaving the courthouse one day, Mrs. Harrison, who had been one of his harshest judges as a child, came up to him with tears in her eyes. "Samson," she said, with tears in her eyes, "I was wrong about you and your whole family. You're a real hero for helping our town now, after everything." It made Samson feel proud, righteous, and a little sad at the same time because of all the years of hard work. He mostly felt hope, though. Hope that people could change, just like his dad always said they could. Jackson sat on the porch of his simple house with the warm coffee and watched the sun rise over the small town he had lived in for a long time. Not only did the bright morning light make the edges of his eyes wrinkle, but so did the smile that seemed to be on his face all the time these days. It was the day he brought Emma and Samson home, 12 little bundles of joy that would never be the same again. He remembered those first few years with mixed feelings. He was happy to see his kids grow, but the mean words and cold looks from his neighbors made him feel bad. They told him, "You're wrong. Those children don't belong here." Jackson tightened his grip on his coffee as he thought about how lonely and alone he felt. He had times when the weight of everything made him wonder if he was strong enough to give Emma and Samson the life they deserved. After that, he'd look at them, hear them laugh, and know in his heart that he had made the right choice. It had been worth every sacrifice and every mean word. As Jackson watched Emma save lives at the hospital and Samson fight for justice in court, he felt a warmth in his chest that no amount of coffee could take away. It wasn't enough for his kids to just survive in a world that wasn't inviting before. They were thriving and making it better. On Jackson's face, a tear fell as he thought of all the important events. First steps, first days of school, and graduations. He was always there for everyone and cheered them on, even when no one else would. "I'm so proud of you both," he told the morning air in a tearful whisper. "So very proud." One evening in the summer, Emma and Samson walked together to the town's summer fair. The smell of popcorn and the sound of laughing filled the warm evening air. They both paused for a moment as memories of times in the past made them feel uncomfortable, came racing back. "You okay?" Samson asked as he held his sister's hand. "Take a big breath and nod, Emma. Let's do this." Something felt different as they moved through the crowd. No whispers or sideways glances were heard, but people were looking at them. Some people even waved. Dr. Smith called Mrs. Thompson, an old woman Emma had just finished treating. "It's great to see you, sweetheart. How are you?" Emma was shocked, and her eyes got really big. "Hi, Mrs. Thompson. I'm fine. How does your hip feel?" "Much better, thanks to you," the old woman smiled. As they walked on, Samson saw a group of people who used to be his peers. But instead of giving him the cold shoulder, they waved him over. "Hey, Sam, heard you won a big case." One of them gave him a clap and said, "That was awesome, man." The brothers looked at each other in shock. They had never been here before. As the night went on, more and more people came up to them. Some people said nice things about Emma's job at the hospital, and others told Samson how proud they were of his recent legal wins. It was clear that they felt warmth and respect in their words. Even though people were impressed, there was a current of confusion going through them. A lot of people in the town couldn't quite understand how the successful adults around them could be related to the kids they used to avoid. Emma heard a woman tell another, "I just don't get it. After everything this town put them through, why do they still help us?" People asked Samson the same things. "You could have gone to any law firm in a big city," the town banker, Mr. Johnson, told her. "Why stay here and help people who, well, you know?" The siblings gave each other a knowing look. Both of them knew the answer, but it wasn't easy to explain to people who hadn't known their father's steadfast love and support. As the night went on, it became clear that the way people in town saw the Smith family had changed. Even though it was new and a little awkward, the respect and awe were real. Even though there was still some doubt about how committed they were to the community, it was clear that change was starting to grow. As the summer went on, Mr. Wilkins got better with Emma's expert care, taking small steps each day toward full health. He finally got the all-clear to leave the hospital, but he wanted to meet with Dr. Smith alone before he left. Emma walked into Mr. Wilkins' room with a warm smile and a clean white coat. "Good morning, Mr. Wilkins. How do you feel today?" The old man sat up straighter in bed, and his eyes were bright and clear. "Much better, thanks to you, Dr. Smith." Emma smiled and nodded, happy with his progress. "That's good to hear. You've come a long way in your recovery." Mr. Wilkins cleared his throat and moved his hands around on the edge of his blanket. "Dr. Smith, Emma, I need to say something." Emma tilted her head, and a look of interest crossed her face. "Of course, Mr. Wilkins. What is it?" I want to thank you," he said, his voice heavy with love. "Not just for saving my life, but for showing me kindness I didn't deserve." Even though Emma's face arched a little, she kept quiet and let Mr. Wilkins continue. He looked sad and said, "I judged you and your family unfairly for years. I was one of the people who talked about your dad behind his back after he adopted you and your brother. I was wrong." When Mr. Wilkins looked up at Emma, tears came to his eyes. "Because of our past, you could have been rude to me, but you weren't. Thank you for taking such good care of me. It helped me see you and your family as they really are." Emma's heart was beating fast with feeling, but she kept her cool around work. She asked in a soft voice, "And who are we, Mr. Wilkins?" He answered right away, "Kind-hearted, strong, and selfless. You've shown this town what heart and strength really look like. I feel bad that I missed it for so long." The next week, Samson stood on the steps of the courthouse, his heart racing with happiness and happiness. The people who had gathered outside cheered as he came out, accompanied by the workers he had just protected. Their faces used to be scarred with fear, but now they were filled with happiness and thanks. Samson yelled, "We won," and his words echoed around the square. Justice has been served for these hardworking individuals who were wrongfully terminated. The crowd's cheers got stronger. There were well-known people from the town among them. People who had once been suspicious of Samson now looked at him with admiration and respect. A worker named Joe, who was older, stepped forward. As he took Samson's hand, his eyes were wet with tears. "Say thanks to Mr. Smith. You've given us back our honor and our jobs. Thank you so much." Samson smiled as he thought about what his father had said about standing up for people who couldn't protect themselves. He responded with a heavy heart, "It was an honor to stand with you." As the crowd broke up, Samson saw a group of town officials coming toward him. While Mayor Rodriguez had been rude to the Smith family in the past, he now looked like he respected them. "Samson," the mayor said, "I'm happy for you that you earned this victory. This town needs people like you who care about doing the right thing and are willing to stand up for it." Samson agreed, but he was surprised by what the mayor said. "Thank you, sir. Because I think it's the right thing to do. That's why we'd like to give you a job on the ethics committee of the town," Mayor Rodriguez said. "We need someone with your passion for justice to help guide our community forward." People in town started to see Samson in a different way after hearing about his win and the mayor's offer. He was no longer just Jackson Smith's adopted son. He was Samson Smith, a major figure in the fight for justice in their town. As word spread that Emma was a skilled and caring doctor, she got more and more patients. People who used to cross the street to avoid her were now in her waiting room, looking for her help. Emma knew about the change, but she never let it get in the way of her determination to get better. Mrs. Larson, a woman who had been very clear about her dislike of the Smith family in the past, nervously walked into Emma's office one afternoon. She sat down with shaking hands and avoided making eye contact. "Dr. Smith," she said slowly, "no, I haven't been kind to you or your family in the past. But I've heard how good you are, and I really need help." Mrs. Larson looked into Emma's warm brown eyes, and she smiled softly. "Mrs. Larson, it's important that you're here now. What can I do to help you?" Emma listened carefully to Mrs. Larson's worries, asking serious questions and reassuring her. This made Mrs. Larson feel better. As the meeting came to an end, Mrs. Larson's eyes filled with tears. "Dr. Smith, I know how you can be so kind to me after everything." There was a pat on Mrs. Larson's hand from Emma. "Mrs. Larson, we are all human. We need to learn and grow. Let's work on getting you better now." As word got out about how well Emma cared for her patients, more people who used to criticize her came to her office. Every time, Emma treated them with the same kindness and care that she gave all of her patients. She never brought up hurts from the past or asked for forgiveness. She instead focused on what she was good at, which was healing. During quiet times between cases, Emma would think about the path that had led her to this point. She remembered the hurt of being left out, the comments, and the cold looks. But she didn't feel angry. Instead, she felt calm. The lessons her father taught her about forgiveness and kindness had shaped her into the doctor and person she is today. It had been a month, and now the town hall was packed with people excited for the big community event. The names of Dr. Emma Smith and attorney Samson Smith were proudly written on banners that hung from the ceiling. There was a hint of nervousness in the air, along with many excited people. Jackson Smith sat in the front row, feeling very proud. He saw Emma and Samson walk out on stage. They looked every bit the skilled professionals they had become. Mayor Rodriguez cleared his throat as he took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he started, "we're here today to honor two of our own who have done great things for our town. Samson and Dr. Emma Smith have shown us how to get through hard times and make a real change in people's lives." Following the mayor's speech, Jackson saw some well-known names in the crowd. People had crossed the street to stay away from him and his kids before. As they sat there, their heads were bowed, and their faces showed a mix of shame and admire. Mayor Rodriguez called Jackson to the stage after Emma and Samson had each spoken for a short time. "And now, we'd like to honor the man who made all this possible, Jackson Smith." Jackson took his time and walked slowly up the stairs. From the stage, he could see a sea of faces that he had known for decades. Mr. Wilkins stood up all of a sudden. He said, "Jackson," but his voice was shaking. "I'm sorry for what I did. It was wrong of me to judge you for taking Emma and Samson in. I'm truly sorry for how I behaved towards you and your family. I now understand what a great dad you were." There was a mutter in the crowd. After that, Mrs. Larson got up. "Sorry too, Jackson. Because of my biases, I couldn't see how much love there was in your family. I deeply regret what I did." One by one, more people in the town stood up and said they were sorry. People were crying as years of prejudice and confusion started to fall apart. Jackson stood at the stage and was moved to tears by the outpouring of regret and new respect. When he looked at Emma and Samson, he saw the same mix of feelings that he had: surprise, thanks, and a deep sense of being healed. Jackson took a deep breath. Tears were still in his eyes. He looked out at the crowd, and his eyes were warm and smart. As he began, "Thank you all for your kind words." His voice was soft but steady. "I want you to know that I never held a grudge against any of you." Everyone in the crowd let out a collective gasp. Many people thought Jackson would be angry or upset, but his words were full of kindness. "You see," Jackson went on, "promised myself and them when I adopted Emma and Samson. I promised to love, care for, and understand them as I raised them. It was also important to teach them to see the good in everyone, even those who might hurt them." He stopped and turned to look at his kids. The stage was filled with Emma and Samson. Their eyes were filled with love and pride for their father. Jackson turned back to the crowd and said, "Forgiveness isn't always easy, but it's the way to heal. It helps us move forward, get better, and make our group better as a whole." The words that Jackson spoke filled the room and touched everyone there. Many people in the crowd wiped their eyes and nodded their heads in agreement. "I raised Emma and Samson to understand that people sometimes fear what they don't understand," Jackson said. "But I also taught them that kindness and love can make things better. That's why they turned out to be the kind, successful adults you see here today." He pointed to his kids with a proud look on his face. It wasn't easy for them to learn to forgive. It was the right thing to do. These people have made our town grow and change for the better. The people in the town really felt what Jackson said. They saw not only a man who had put up with their bias, but also one who had dealt with it with grace and wisdom, raising two wonderful children in the process. As soon as Jackson's sincere words reached the crowd, there was silence. A mix of sorrow, admiration, and hope could be seen on the faces of the people who were slowly moving. The town library, Mrs. Santos, was the first person to talk to Emma and Samson. She reached out to them with shaking hands. She said in a shaking voice, "I'm so sorry. I didn't give you a chance. I did something bad, and I hope you can forgive me." Emma gave Mrs. Santos a warm smile and took her hands. "Of course, Mrs. Santos. Thanks for telling me you're sorry. We value it greatly." Samson agreed and nodded, and his eyes got soft. "We get it, and we don't dislike you or anyone else." Others were stronger than Mrs. Santos, which made them want to speak up. The owner of the hardware shop, Mr. Jenkins, walked up with tears in his eyes. He said, "I was one of the worst. I told lies about you and made your life hard. I'm sorry, but I can't take that back." Samson put his hand on the shoulder of Mr. Jenkins. "What matters is that you're here now, aware of the past, and ready to do better. That's important." More people in the town came forward to say they were sorry and tell stories about how Emma and Samson had helped them. This made the whole community feel better. Old grudges were forgotten, and a new respect and understanding took their place. Jackson stood off to the side and watched, his heart beating fast with pride. His hard work paid off in many ways, not just in his children's successful jobs, but also in their ability to forgive and make things better. As they greeted each person, Emma and Samson stood next to each other. They lived by the lessons Jackson had taught them their whole lives. To fight prejudice with understanding, to fight hate with love, and to always believe that healing can work. As the days went by, it became clearer how the town had changed. After being shunned, the Smith family was now at the center of the society. No longer were Emma, Samson, and Jackson just put up with. They were praised. Emma's medicine business did very well. People from all walks of life came to see her because she was kind and skilled. As she did her rounds at the hospital one afternoon, she heard two nurses talking. "Dr. Smith is great," said one. "Do you remember how people used to talk about her behind her back? She is being praised all the time now." The other nurse said, "Yes. It's like day and night. She always looks on the bright side and saves many lives. It makes me happy to work with her." Emma smiled to herself because what they said made her feel good. She remembered how her father had taught her to forgive and keep going even when things got hard. At the same time, Samson's law company had become a beacon of hope for people who were looking for justice. People who used to cross the street to avoid him are now waiting in line outside of his office to ask for his help. Samson once had a sharp critic named Mr. Wilkins. One day, after winning another case, he ran into him as he was leaving the building. The tone of Mr. Wilkins' speech was full of respect. As he spoke, "I want to tell you that I think you're doing great things for this town. You're a blessing to us." Samson gave him a friendly shake. "Thank you, Wilkins. Thank you very much for that." Just like Michael, Jackson felt welcome in the group. He was asked to talk about adoption and acceptance at a nearby school. He felt like he had accomplished something as he stood in front of a room full of interested people. He told the kids, "Love has no color. It only sees the heart. Remember that, and the world will be a better place." The town, which used to be full of whispers and sideways looks, had changed into a place where everyone felt welcome and respected. The Smith family's journey not only changed their own lives, but it also changed the lives of everyone in the neighborhood. As the sun went down, it cast a nice glow through the windows of the Smith home, where Jackson, Emma, and Samson were eating dinner. The smell of home-cooked food filled the room, making their family time feel more comfortable. When Jackson saw his grown and successful children, he felt a rush of happiness in his heart. He couldn't help but think back to the early days, when people in town made fun of them and judged them. They were now well-known and respected members of the society. "Just to start," Jackson said in a soft voice, "you know, I was just thinking about how far we've come." Emma looked up from her food, and her eyes were bright. "Thanks, Dad. We wouldn't be here without you. We got everything from you." Samson agreed and nodded. "Do you remember how Mrs. Thompson would cross the street to get away from us? Every Sunday, she makes you a pie." Now, they all laughed at the memory, which was very different from the pain they had felt before. Through tears in his voice, Jackson said, "I'm so proud of both of you. Emma, I love how you treat your patients, even the ones who used to judge us. It is amazing. And Samson, I'm always amazed by how hard you work for justice, standing up for people who can't do it themselves." Emma put her hand on her dad's and squeezed it. "Dad, you taught us how to be strong and forgive. Without your love and help, we wouldn't be who we are today." Samson leaned back in his chair and looked at his thoughts. "When I was little, I always wondered why people thought we were so funny. But you always told us to be proud of who we are and keep our heads up." Jackson smiled as he thought about those tough talks. "No matter what other people thought, I just wanted you both to know that I loved you." Emma said in a soft voice, "And we did. We knew all along. We always knew you were on our side, even when things were tough." The weight of their common history wrapped around them like a warm blanket as they sat there in quiet for a moment. Samson finally said, "Thank you, Dad, for having faith in us when no one else did. Because you showed us what real strength looks like." Jackson's eyes started to tear up. He said, "I'm the lucky one. You two have taught me more than I ever thought possible about love and bravery." People from all walks of life came to the charity event, celebrating the Smith family, which took place in the town hall. There were colorful posters on the walls that said things like unity and equality. There was a buzz in the air that meant life was about to change. As people came in, Jackson, Emma, and Samson stood near the door and smiled at them. They were still getting used to how much support they were getting from people who had turned their backs on them before. Emma told her dad in a whisper, "I can't believe this is happening." Her eyes were wide with amazement. Jackson gave her a light squeeze. He answered, with tears in his eyes, "It's amazing what love and forgiveness can do." Isolated bits of talk were heard as they moved through the crowd. People were talking about ways to help poor families, give scholarships to students from minority groups, and start community projects that would help people understand and accept each other. When Mayor Rodriguez got to the stage, he tapped the mic to get everyone's attention. Her voice was clear and loud as she spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "we're here tonight to honor a family that has taught us all a valuable lesson in love, forgiveness, and persistence." Everyone in the room stopped talking and looked at the Smiths. Look at the looks of people who had crossed the street to avoid Jackson and his kids. It made Jackson feel a lump in his throat. The Smith family has shown us that the only way to be truly strong is to let people who are different from us into our hearts, Mayor Rodriguez said. "We are not only raising money tonight, we are also promising to be better and do better for everyone in our community." The room was filled with cheers. Samson was so moved by the moment that he blinked back tears. He remembered all the times he had fought for justice in court. He never thought that one day, people in his own town would do the same. As the evening went on, many people in the town came up to Jackson, Emma, and Samson, and told them how the Smith family had moved them to make changes. A lot of money was made for many good causes, but what was more important was that the event was a turning point for the town. After the charity event was over, Jackson, Emma, and Samson went outside into the cool evening air. They could see their way as they walked through town, because the street lights gave the streets a warm glow. Jackson had Samson's hand in his right and Emma's hand in his left. As they walked down Main Street, they saw that the town and the people in it had changed. There were now new companies owned by families from different backgrounds, and the walls were covered with colorful murals that celebrated unity. A lot of people smiled and waved, and some even stopped to talk. Mrs. Johnson smiled at Emma and Samson as she walked up to them. She had once refused to let her kids play with them. She said, with tears in her eyes, "I just wanted to thank you all again. You've shown us what real grace and strength look like." Jackson said yes, and his heart was full. "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Everyone is learning and growing at the same time." They walked on and went by the school where Emma and Samson had experienced racism for the first time. Now, there was a sign over the door that said, "Diversity is our strength." Samson put his hand on his dad's. "Remember when we used to walk this way and people would cross the street to avoid us?" he asked, amazed at how much had changed. Jackson nodded, and tears were running in his eyes. "Yes, son. Now look at us. Take a look at our town." As they walked by, Emma smiled as she saw families from all walks of life enjoying the evening together in the park. She was amazed. It's like a whole different place. They saw their neighbors on their porches waving and calling out to them as they turned the corner onto their street. The angry looks had been changed to looks of real respect and admiration. The former reviewer, Mr. Wilkins, whose life Emma had saved, walked slowly with the help of his cane. He said, with a warm laugh, "Those are our town heroes. You Smiths have taught us old folks a lot about love and acceptance." Jackson smiled, and he felt calm come over him. "Mr. Wilkins, we're all heroes when we pick love over hate," he answered. When they got home, The family stopped on the porch and looked out at the street. They had walked a million times. But now, instead of being scared and alone, they felt like they were part of a community. If you've been inspired by the story of the Smith family, I've handpicked another story that's sure to touch your heart. Don't miss it. Click here to watch.